Don't sell yourself short in the behavioral interview. If you are preparing for behavioral interview, you may have heard of the STAR method of how to format your responses to behavioral interview questions. And maybe you're organizing and preparing your STAR method anecdotes and you run into a problem because you don't have a well-defined quantitative result. Without that quantitative result, you're going to be unable to effectively communicate and drive home the impact of your achievements. In this video, I want to talk about ballparking, which is a quantitative estimation technique that can help you add and backfill quantitative results, or maybe you already have a quantitative result, but you can clarify it by translating it into a value that is better understood by the business. And I'll be using the example of team size in this video. So you can think that growing a team is a result itself. And if I give you the number of headcount that I grew, that is a quantitative result in itself. But it may not be obvious to your interviewer what is the revenue or profit impact of that. So we can ballpark those revenue and profit impacts and use that as our quantitative result directly, instead of using this indirect, roundabout, harder to interpret signal around headcount growth. So in 2016, I worked at a company called SAIC. This is a government contractor. I don't know the specific revenue impact. I don't know the award of that contract to which I contributed and delivered on. What I do know is I know the headcount size of the team that was hired to fulfill that contract. So I can ballpark or estimate the revenue impact by making an assumption around the willingness of SAIC to spend to hire. And specifically, the assumption is they are going to pay less than the contract was awarded because they're going to take some profit. I can even go a step further and look online for average data around normal margin. And I can make this more specific by looking for normal margin for SAIC or more normal margin for government contractors. So I can ballpark a revenue estimate and I can even ballpark a profit estimate. And we call this ballparking because it's using sort of aggregate data and then applying it to this situation or estimating it in this situation, as opposed to having specific knowledge of the contract details, which I don't have access to. So a ballpark estimate to revenue might go like this. I know that there were 10 headcount on this team, and then I can look up the average engineer wages. And there I have a ballpark estimate of the amount spent on those engineers. And the assumption is that the income from the contract would be bigger than the amount spent just on the engineers. As I mentioned, I could further look up expected margin instead of just revenue and get a profit impact. I could also look up the expected allocation of a budget award to HR and headcount versus other expenses. And maybe I could make a higher estimate of revenue because that 10 headcount is just going to be one share of the contract expense. That gets more complicated, but if you have access to those public data, you can make estimates, you can make a ballpark. Try not to ballpark too much. Try to keep it as specific as possible with the data available. So earlier I talked about using the average wages for an engineer. I could make this a little more specific if I knew what SAIC in particular paid for engineers, for example. Or if I just had a loose indication, do they roughly pay above or below market? I can make more accurate and defensible and justifiable ballpark estimates this way. Strike a balance between simplicity and accuracy. You're not going to go through this whole ballpark estimate construction logic. At interview time, you're going to give a top line number to your interviewer and they might dig in. And just be prepared to anticipate those questions and defend your ballpark estimate assumptions. I would recommend you outright say that this is an estimate. So when you frame the result, frame it as estimated revenue or something like that. And when it comes to delivery time, I would prioritize just expressing this simply so that you're not wasting too much time in the interview itself. And you can get that point across like a home run, a powerful hit in the interview. Hope this helps. Follow for more.